All right, everyone, we are going to dive into the fun and examine theories of personality as well as psychodynamic theories of personality for this section of information. So, what is personality? Basically, personality refers to your enduring characteristics and behavior, those things that compromise your unique adjustment to life, including major traits, interests, what drives you, your values, your sense of self, your abilities, and all of your emotional patterns. And so, while psychologists agree on what personality is, there's various theories about how we explain why we have the specific personalities that we do. So, for the first part of our information today, we're going to take a look at four major perspectives of personality. We're going to look at their founding theorists and we're going to try to describe their viewpoint in a sentence or two. And then throughout the course of the unit, we're going to unpack each of these perspectives in a little bit more detail. Let's start out with the psychodynamic perspective, and you can fill this information into your interactive notebook today. So first we have our psychodynamic perspective. The founding theorists are good old Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, and others. And the psychodynamic approach really views people as struggling between their own animal instincts, what we want to do as selfish people, and the pressures of socialization. So the psychodynamic approach really looks at our personalities in terms of how well are we able to keep our animal instincts in check and not act irrationally or impulsively and live up to the expectations of society? They say that our ability to do that literally influences our personality in different ways. And so we'll take a look at that in more detail today. The personality perspective, founding theorists are Gordon Allport and Heinz Eisnick, and they say that people exhibit consistent psychological traits such as extroversion or deceitfulness over the course of their lifetime. So the personality trait perspective is a very nature-based perspective. These guys basically say that we're born into the world with particular biologically influenced traits that influence our personality that we really don't have a ton of control over in terms of changing those. And so maybe you can think about some really strong characteristics that you have, some that you might like, some that you might not even like, but sometimes we do have traits that are difficult to change, and that would be evidence toward this nature-based trait theory of personality. Another approach is the humanistic approach, and hopefully this term rings a bell for you. We've talked about the humanistic approach in multiple chapters throughout our time together so far. But famous humanists are Abraham Maslow. You just learned about Maslow's hierarchy of needs last chapter, and Carl Rogers. And these guys view people as basically seeking personal growth and striving toward becoming their best selves. If you remember, the top of Maslow's hierarchy is self actualization. And so they say that our personalities are really wrapped up in how freely we feel that we can become the best possible versions of ourselves, or are there obstacles standing in our way? And then finally, we have the social cognitive approach. Founding theorists are George Kelly and Walter Mischel, and they say that people behave according to how they're able to cope with social pressures and solve social problems within the social norms that we're growing up under. So, we're going to unpack all of these in more detail as we move throughout this chapter, but wanted to provide you just a basic introduction to what is personality and how do different perspectives seek to explain why we have the personalities that we do. Before we dive too far into personality, I do want to take a moment just to allow you a chance to review some basic research methods from Unit 2. I mentioned earlier in the year how these are going to thread throughout subsequent chapters, and here we see them again. So each major perspective that seeks to explain why we have the personalities that we do, they tend to rely on particular research methods to answer their specific questions about personality. So let's take a quick look and review these major methods here. We have the case study method, which is an in-depth study of one individual. Psychoanalysts and humanists love the case study perspective because it's less expensive than other methods and it allows them to take that deep dive into what is actually making an individual person tick. A weakness with that approach is that you're not able to generalize the results of case studies to the larger population. We also have the survey approach, so the systematic questioning of a large random sample of a population. The trait psychologists, the social cognitivists, and a lot of positive psychologists actually really tend to like the survey method because they want to understand traits or other ways of being across a large population of folks. And surveys tend to be the easiest way to get a large amount of information in a quick amount of time. We are then able to generalize to the huger population based on the sample size that we have. A weakness is that that tends to be a little bit more expensive, and we really only get correlational findings. We aren't able to make any cause and effect claims about personality. One that we haven't seen together yet is the projective test research method. And I would put research method in air quotes there because it's not overly objective. But a projective test is basically where you're presented with some sort of ambiguous stimuli that's designed to trigger you to project your inner thoughts and feelings onto it. So if you've ever seen those famous ink blot tests, those would be an example of a projective test. That is strictly limited to the psychodynamic perspective of personality, and we'll unpack that a little bit more when I see you in class next time. Those are designed to get beneath our conscious surface. And again, the idea is that we're projecting our unconscious desires onto these ambiguous stimuli. Weaknesses is that the results have a very, very weak validity and reliability, almost to the point that it's not worth doing them. Couple others here, personality inventory. So you may have taken multiple different personality tests in your lifetime. One really long, famous one is the MMPI, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. And personality inventories are objectively scored groups of questions designed to identify particular personality dispositions. So maybe you've taken a personality test that tells you you're introverted or conscientious or agreeable or something like that. The benefits are that those are generally reliable and empirically validated. However, they only explore a limited number of traits, so they're a little bit limited that way. Observations are another way for us to understand personality. That's where we're just studying how individuals react in different situations. These are preferred by the social cognitivists. They allow researchers to study the effects of different environmental factors on the way an individual's personality is expressed. And again, a limitation of case studies and observations is that you really can't generalize the results from one person or one small group to the larger population. And then lastly, we have good old experimentation. This is where we're purposefully manipulating variables with random assignment to conditions so that we can prove a cause and effect relationship between variables. The social cognitivists are also known to do some of these experiments, which we can talk about next time. Again, the pro of any type of true experiment is that it helps us claim cause and effect. A limitation is that some variables, especially when we're looking at personality, really can't be feasibly or sometimes even ethically manipulated. So now that we've done a review of research methods, let's do a little bit of a who's who in terms of famous psychologists in the realm of personality. Let's start with Alfred Adler. So this guy is known as the founder of individual psychology, which emphasizes the uniqueness of the individual and the role of societal factors in shaping personality. He's most famous for a term you've probably heard in a lot of different pop culture references, the inferiority complex. So basically, Adler said, you have an inferiority complex to the extent that you are feeling insecure and you need to compensate for those feelings of insecurity by acting in ways that make you seem better to other people. So people with an inferiority complex tend to be really controlling. And Adler would say that's a way for them to feel less inadequate themselves is to try to overly control the people around them. He's also really famous for emphasizing the importance of birth order in personality development. So, for instance, if you're a firstborn child like I am, we tend to be the ones who follow the rules and are responsible and organized and do what our parents say, whereas some of those younger siblings are a little bit more fly by the seat of their pants, if you will, according to Adler's research. We also have Albert Bandura. This guy is famous in so many different areas of psychology. He's best known for his social learning theory. We learned about him in the learning chapter, which states that learning happens by observing other people and modeling their behaviors. He's famous for that Bobo the Clown study. But in the area of personality, he's also famous for his work on self efficacy. Self efficacy means our belief that we're capable of successfully performing a certain task and we're capable of successfully meeting particular goals. The higher our self efficacy, the more that's linked to particular personality traits in people or behaviors that we would expect people to do, according to Bandura's research. So we'll dive into that in more detail a little bit later. We've also got Costa and McCrae. These guys are famous for developing the Big Five, the five-factor model that's currently the most widely accepted model of the trait theory of personality. So this model is based on responses to various questionnaires and other research methods from a huge pool of participants from all around the world. The five-factor model basically refers to a group of personality traits that can be assessed through interviews and standardized tests. These basic traits are referred to as openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And we will do some fun tests ourselves around these factors in class as we move forward. We've also got good old Sigmund Freud, known as the father of psychoanalysis, which is a method for treating psychological disorders by means of really extended dialogue between a patient and the psychoanalyst. In addition to his work with the unconscious and the stages of psychosexual development, which we'll get into a little bit later, Freud also developed this really famous model, the iceberg model, most people call it, of the psyche. And he talks about the interaction of the id, the ego, and the superego. So we'll look at that as well. We've also got Carl Jung, so best known as the founder of analytic psychology. This school of thought shares similarities with Freud, but with a little bit less of an emphasis on sex and sexuality. So Jung also developed a theory of personality, and he defines 8 personality types based on the opposing attitudes of introversion and extroversion. According to him, these attitudes refer to a predisposition to behave in a particular manner. So, people who are classified as introverts, he says, tend to place importance on their subjective view of the world, while extroverts place more emphasis on objectivity and external factors. And so, we'll unpack that a little bit more as we get into that theory as well. We've also got some humanists. So, Abraham Maslow, we just learned about his hierarchy. Through his personality theory, he sought to explain that we as humans pursue self actualization or an attempt to achieve our highest personal potential after all of our other more basic needs are fulfilled. And in a sense, this theory begins to break down once individuals reach self actualization. We'll talk about some criticisms at the top of that hierarchy as we move forward. And then we've got Carl Rogers. I absolutely love Carl Rogers, you guys. He's my favorite psychologist of all times. I'm really excited to talk about him with you in class, but he is one of the most influential psychologists of modern times, and he's really well known for the creation of a method called client-centered therapy, also known as person-centered or Rogerian psychotherapy. And he believes, like Maslow, that we all have this self actualizing tendency, this innate drive that pushes us to want to find fulfillment and reach our full potential. And he talks about a fully functioning person. He says that a fully functioning person is someone who's continually moving forward towards self actualization. And this type of person is open to all of life's experiences, has trust in themselves and others, and is able to express their feelings and act independently, all of which are a lot easier said than done. So we'll talk more about his theory as well. With that, we're going to take a pause And we're going to pick up again with psychoanalytic, psychodynamic theories of personality, diving a lot more closely into Freud and his very, very interesting theories.